Thank you, David, for the kind invitation, or for the my thanks to the conference organizers to give me that great chance to be here today. My name is Hani Abdel-Latif. I'm from Swansea University. Basically, I come from Egypt, which means I'm kind of, I would say, African. People normally get surprised when I say I'm African, because they normally say we are Middle Eastern or MENA countries or whatever, but believe it or not, we are in Africa. So that's one thing I have to start with. Another thing is just kind of confession is David has just apologized by putting me the last session and the last presentation. My point is that it's not easy to be the last presentation in the conference, but the surprise is that kind of I get used to that. I already shared this with other people in the conference before in the break. So my little secret that I do, actually, I tell a story. That's my secret, to keep the audience just listening to me. But today, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do the same thing, because I'm here to learn the story from you. And I was just quite scared by being there in front of those experts in Tanzania, because I haven't done much work in Tanzania. My background about Tanzania just is not going to go beyond, or is not beyond what I'm going to show you today. So hopefully you will be able to tell me the story. This project, Global Financial Crisis, Credit Access and Children in Tanzania, is part of a broader project which is about the financial crisis, how the financial crisis affects developing countries. So my main question, or my main interest, what are the channels? How could a shock happen in US or in a developed country or in Europe and affect developing countries like Tanzania? So there must be some links. My job is just to find these links. The link I'm looking at today is the credit access and how this could be linked to children in Tanzania. Let me tell you first what I think is the context I'm working on, which I'm not really sure that this is what I could say is the context, because I haven't been before in Tanzania, which is a bit shame, I would say. But please, if you hear me saying something that is not true, or is not part of that context, please feel free to stop me and say, Hani, shut up, this is not what's going on in Tanzania. So I'll totally accept that. So based on the estimates from the ILO, the International Labour Organization, the estimate for child labor has decreased, or has dropped worldwide by 10%. Most regions have done very good job, except Sub-Saharan Africa, which seems to be running far behind. When I look at Tanzania context, I find that the figures coming from there, 2006, there was 70.4% children involved in work, and this is a kind of more conservative definition of a child labor. And if we consider a broader definition of child labor, this figure goes up to more than 85%. Normally in Tanzania, the mainland, they work in cultivation of coffee, tea, timber, and tobacco. In Zanzibar, it's production of cloves. Interestingly, there is a separate legal system that there's different legal system between Tanzania and between the mainland and Zanzibar, but both they share one thing: they allow light work, but they prohibit dangerous work. And the more interesting thing that in many occasions they don't define what could be dangerous and what could be defined as light work. In the mainland, there is a specific law which has just came out recently, 2009. It's Child Labor Act. In Zanzibar, there's no such specific law, but it comes part of the main law, Employment Act. Of course, there is Anti-Trafficking in Person Act in 2008, and as you can see, that all these laws or legal framework, they just came out very recently. What happened in Tanzania during the crisis? Tanzania wasn't hit directly by the crisis, because Tanzania doesn't have is not well integrated with the financial markets, international financial markets. So that's why we can say Tanzania has survived the first round of the global crisis effect, which started 2007, 2008. So there is no direct impact or no evidence and there is a direct impact of the crisis. However, the global recession which came after affected Tanzania in some ways. So if you look at this graph, you will see the quarterly GDP 2007, 2011 to 2011, and you'd see that the second quarter in 2009, it was very obvious that there is something happening with the GDP there. And although you can see, even though you can see that there's some improvement or recovery, which was very surprising, but this is another evidence that will say it's not very direct link between Tanzania and the global crisis, but still there is some other story that credit access will tell us in just a few minutes. So what happened to the credit access, or what's the status of credit access or credit supply in Tanzania? There are 20 licensed banks, 11 non-bank financial institutions, and 650 saving and credit cooperatives, 16 NGOs, microfinance institutions. The credit to private sector is less than 8% of the GDP. What was shocking to me is that 89% of Tanzania never banking before. That's what I have read in this paper. 8% currently banking or have a bank account. So what happened with the crisis? How the crisis affect this context? What I'm assuming here, what I'm proposing in this paper, in this piece of work, I'm saying that what happened is that it had to take time until the effect of the crisis went through the Tanzanian economy. And if we look at this graph here, this is credit to Tanzanian private sector, and you can see it's very obvious here that even if the GDP showed that the shock or the crisis affected Tanzania in the second quarter in 2009, it continues to affect the credit suppliers, if I would say, a willingness to lend out some money, because this is what has been explained in by the Tanzanian bank, or the Central Bank of Tanzania, that they were hesitating to give money, even though the government think the economy, or all the statistics show that the economy is recovering and there is nothing nothing to be worried about, and even though they still hesitating to give money out. Based on the data I'm going to use, I'm using this piece of work. There was like 40% drop between 2000 in the credit given to household, because the figure I've just shown now is this is the credit given to the private sector, so which includes business and individuals. So based on the data I'm using, there's a drop, 40% drop of credit, the value of the real value of credit that given to household between 2008-9, which is the first round of the data I'm using, and the second round, which is 2010-2011. So what's my motivation to do this work? First thing, the empirical work has to agree, or has come to that point that we agree that financial development is considered as a pro-growth and pro-poor policy instrument. However, the poor, or the Tanzanian poor, are financially excluded, or I can say they are financially illiterate. And I'm sorry for my Tanzanian friends here, because they didn't agree on the second one, but I'm sure they will agree with the first one. At least they are excluded. Child labor in general, it's unresolved phenomena, and it's specific, in more particularly in the poor communities. So what this has to do with the children, credit access. So what's the connection here? When you look at when you think of access to credit, household access to credit, you could have two different point of views in the empirical work. If you give parents money, if you give them loans, if you give them credit, they might start their own businesses, and this increased likelihood that the child will engage in child labor. That's one of the points that has been raised by the empirical literature. And the more interesting thing is, if I want to give some support to this argument or this statement, if we look at the literature on child labor, we'll see that we can classify this in two groups. Some of them look at why producers or why firms hire children? Do they produce, does this have something to do with their productivity or wages or whatever? And the other group is why parents send their children out to work. And the point I'm making here is that 90% or the vast majority of this literature look at only one side, why parents send their children out to work. And that's very clear and obvious, because in most times, in the most situations, you will find that household is the employer of the child as well. So that's why most of the literature is just focusing why parents send their children to work. And you will find few paper looking at why employers employ children. So that's one view. So give people money, give them credit. They will use it to start their small businesses, and children will be engaged in that business. Or the other one, give the other point of view. It just when you make credit available, this will give another coping mechanism to the parents, so they have kind of choice now to keep their children in schools and rely on that money, and then in return, when their kids grow up and they go to work, they're gonna work and they're gonna pay this back to them. So it's kind of two different or contradicting view looking at the relationship between credit access and children. But what I'm looking at here, or the context I'm looking at here, show that the financial crisis means limited access to credit, and as I said, it distorts the household decision regarding children work. And normally when time of crisis, the parents make decision, they get affected by outside. They might make not rational decisions. They don't make it because they're under pressure of the shock. So that normally comes on the expense of women and children. So that's very obvious link. Regarding the policy intervention, as I just said now, they're just looking for some coping mechanism, how to survive the shock. So any successful policy would offer them some alternatives that they can do. So stop saying, oh, you can't tell them, don't send your children to work. No, tell them what they should do when there's a crisis, when they have income shock. So tell them what they can do. You can't tell them what they can't do, because they're gonna send them to work. So you have to offer them something in return. Anyway, so I've got here an example of subsidized credit schemes. It hasn't been proved to be very effective. My objective here is to estimate or to measure the global financial crisis effect on children through access to credit. I want to emphasize here that I'm looking at the short-term effect of the access to credit. My contribution here is unlike all the other literature that using self-reported shocks. So they go to parents, they go to household, and they ask them about different kind of shock, and they just tick the box. So it could be something that people just complain about their living standard, but using the financial shock or the financial crisis is totally exogenous shock, and it's very clear shock. I'm introducing kind of novel instrument that I can use to measure credit access. Of course, this is the first study to measure the shock impact on children and the link between this and credit access. And I will propose some policy implication. That's the data I'm using. I'm just gonna go through this very quickly. It has two rounds. The first round was 2008, as I said, 2009. The second round was 2010, 2011. And based on the data I've just shown about the credit to private sector, I'm assuming that the shock happened or fully realized somewhere in between these two. That's the main model I'm using. So here, Y is equal to 1 if the child work, equal to 0 if the child doesn't work, credit if the household gets credit, receive credit, shock, this happened in time 2 or round 2. Credit shock, this is my main interest, which is beta 3, which is the difference in difference estimator. So which X is the number of regressors, that gender, age, rural, whether they are based in rural areas, and household members, the number of household members, and some list of other regressors. The only problem I have here, or the main problem I have here, that this way of estimating the effect of the crisis assume that both groups who received credit and those who didn't receive credit, they are very similar to each other, which is not necessarily to be true. So they might be different somehow. So they might, because what I can observe is those who already got credit, not those who apply for credit and they were not accepted or their application were not successful. So I can't assume that those who got credit, those only people who has access to credit. There might be some other parents who had the chance to apply for credit, but just simply they didn't apply or they don't want to have credit. So the literature offers some answer to this question, which is using instrumental variables. And here's the procedure I'm using. I'm not gonna explain it in details, but if anyone is interested, you can just talk to me after. My instrument actually combined both the microfinance institutions in a specific region and the assets. And the novelty here, or the new thing here, is that I'm not using the value of assets, because if I use the value of assets, it will pick somehow the wealth effect in this relationship, which is correlated with the child labor, which is not gonna do exactly what we want to do. So that's what I'm doing here. It's just I'm counting how many assets they have. I'm counting how many microfinance institution work in the region, and I construct the new instrument, which I called micro asset, which take a value from 0 to 1. So 0 means no access to credit, 1 is like 100% they have access to credit. That's kind of showing the relationship between the number of institutions working in some areas and the index. The estimation here, I'm just jumping to the estimation because I have only 5 minutes. My main interest here is 1 minute, okay. Okay, so just simply and very quickly, so my main interest here is credit crisis. That what show, that's the, what we can see here is that it increased child labor. So the first panel, that 1, 2, 3, 4 are different models. I'm using different regressors, different variables. So I can see here, what I can see here is that positive effect. So child labor has increased because of the shock, because what happened, the shock decreased the available credit, and then this forced the household or the parents to send their children to work. What happened to the school attendance? It's negatively affected the school attendance. That before using my instrument. Using my instrument show a similar story. Well, exactly the same story, sorry. But when I looked at child is a very like loosey word. So you need to define who is the child. So in my sample, that's something that I should have started with. I defined the child is from 6 to 16, and then you wouldn't have, or you wouldn't see any agreement in the literature about the age of the child. So I changed it a little bit from 8, start from 8, because given that in Tanzania they have, well, I think they should start school from 6 years or 5, I don't remember. And they have some, when they are 6 years old. So they have kind of delay enrollment as well. So that's what I'm saying. I start with 8, from 8 to 16. I differentiate between rural and urban and above poverty line. So I construct the national poverty line. So I split the sample between above and below that line. So what we can see, or what we can conclude from all this, that the negative shock to credit increases child labor and school dropout. Child work and schooling are not mutually exclusive incidents in Tanzania, which means if I go back to the tables, you'll see that the magnitude of the coefficient is much, much bigger with the case of child labor, but not the same response with the school. So which means that children, they go to school, but they go to work as well. So they don't drop out school, they combine both together. Older children or older child is more likely to join the labor market, which is kind of expected. It's very it's something that prevalent in the rural communities, which is again expected. What is important for policy here is that when I split the sample between above and below the poverty line, credit access show that it works above the poverty line, which means there's kind of threshold, income threshold, that above which any strategy or any policy intervention based on giving people credit might work, but below that line is not going to work, because simply they will take the money, they will take the credit, and they will send the children to work as well. So that's what I'm introducing here. So or the policy I'm discussing here. So kind of, if we have a subsidized credit per se might not be sufficient. It has to be in some context, and if you want to have kind of rural-oriented credit programs, that has to be combined with financial awareness campaigns. So you have to teach people, you have to show people that what opportunities they have. The limitation of this study, child labor is kind of a legal thing, so it is underreported, so I expect the results to be much higher than what I found. And I didn't make any distinction between formal and informal credit, and that's very important because in the context of Tanzania, it's equally important. So 50% of my sample, they get credit from formal sources, and the other 50% they get from neighbors and friends. A cross-country study will help to generalize these results. I can't generalize these results. I'm just talking about Tanzania, and that's all I got. So hopefully you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.